where silence has Lease. The Enterprise encounters a mysterious void in space, and when they move in closer to investigate, it envelops them and they can't get out.
The episode starts out with Picard worried about Riker and Worf, who seem to be on an alien planet where they're battling some villains from He-Man, but it turns out they're really in the holodeck.
So after they defeat Armadillomon and Skullomon, Riker asks,
"You do this every day?"
And Worf responds that usually it's more intense, but those are too personal to share. I don't really want to know what he's talking about.
Hey Worf, you mind lending me those programs?
The Enterprise encounters this void in space, which appears to just be a hole, and they don't know what it is. And Picard keeps asking Data for more information, and Data keeps saying, "I don't know." And Picard and Riker are pretty dumb about it. Again, they are out in front, they're encountering stuff no one has ever seen before or even knows about. And they say, well, we should know about it already.
They know there's something weird out there, but they say it doesn't show up on their sensors, which doesn't make sense because they can visually see there's a gap in there, so there should be something showing up on the sensors, at least an absence of anything.
It is also quite possible that whatever's out there, their sensors can't pick up, because there are forms of matter and energy they probably don't know about.
From a Star Trek perspective, that's true. From real life, I would say that wouldn't really be accurate.
So they launch a probe into it, and it disappears.
See, I'm surprised they didn't just fly right into it right at the beginning, because that seems to be what they usually do in this show.
And then Worf says they should go to Yellow Alert.
Recommend we go to Yellow Alert, sir. Why?
And Worf tells him basically of a Klingon folktale of a monster, and then he kind of checks himself and says, yeah, that's kind of silly. His caution is still valid. They don't know what's going on. Things just disappear into it. They know nothing about it. It doesn't show up on their sensors. They should be cautious.
Right.
But instead, they decide to go in closer while saying they should be really careful.
They've encountered so much weird stuff up to this point already. Honestly, everybody should have PTSD from all the weird stuff they encounter week to week.
Then they basically get eaten by the void. One of the characters says,
It's like looking into infinity, sir.
but when you're looking out into space and there's stars, that would be like looking out into infinity. You've never said that before? What a dumb thing to say.
We know by this point that Dr. Pulaski doesn't like Data. Not even that she doesn't like him, but just that she doesn't treat him like a real person. And of course, it's always very heavy-handed when something like that comes up, but they need to really drill it into our heads.
She even says,
Your service record says that you are alive. I must accept that.
with extreme reluctance. What is her problem?
She works in a science-based field. You would think if they have the kind of technology that can create people like Data, you would think the medical field is a field they would be using stuff like that in. She should have experience with very advanced technology by this point.
They wonder if they've gone into a different dimension, and Data asks,
Could a lack of dimension be another dimension in itself?
which is a really cool question. And then Pulaski's about to engage him in conversation. I was excited to hear what they were going to talk about, but because it's Star Trek, Picard goes, hold on, we don't have time to talk about that now.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that would be more of a philosophical discussion anyway. That's a blurry line there sometimes. At first, when the Enterprise is flying around inside this new dimension or whatever it is, everybody seems pretty okay with it, and they just assume that they can get out as easily as they got in. But there's no reason to believe that if they haven't seen anything exiting from this region or anything like that. They don't know what it is, they don't know anything about it, but nobody even seems to question the possibility that they won't be able to get out. That would be the first thing I would try to do as soon as I got swallowed up, try to make sure I could get out.
Geordi has no clue what's going on. He's down in engineering. They have to relay information to him from on the bridge. But with all the technology they have, it might be helpful to have a monitor of the view screen below deck so he can see what's going on too. He doesn't even know they're in that void.
That's a really good point. It would make sense for the characters to carry something that would let them see what the people on the bridge are seeing while they are elsewhere on the ship.
So they can't get out. They decide to drop a beacon so they have a fixed point for reference, which is smart. But they end up doing a Pac-Man warp and end up back where they started from. They detect a Romulan vessel, which could have explained a lot. That actually might have worked out well because in the Neutral Zone, the last episode of the first season, the Romulans showed up, but it didn't go anywhere. And this could have been some kind of closure to that, but they blow up the ship very easily, and we see how prejudiced Geordi is.
I thought that was a little strange.
Picard says,
Oh, that was too easy.
but again, he doesn't know where they are, what's going on, if the Romulans actually are there, how the void affects their ship and their technology. He's assuming everything is the same as it normally would be anywhere else.
Right. The characters throughout the episode don't ask the right questions.
Next, the USS Yamato appears, which is a Starfleet vessel, but it shows no life signs on board. Riker and Worf decide to leave the Enterprise, which is probably a bad idea. They specifically state the Yamato should not be there, so logically you would think it probably isn't. Let's stay here. After they blew up the Romulan ship, there was no sign of debris, which means it probably wasn't really there either.
The audience should not be making smarter decisions than the characters on the Enterprise.
Agreed. And all of a sudden, Wesley has inexplicably been replaced with some random guy on the bridge, which does not bode well for that guy.
Right. That guy's name is Haskell, and every shot that he's in, he looks completely bored. They couldn't find a better actor than that.
He's like, man, I would do anything to get off this ship. I'd even die. An exit appears, but the Enterprise can't go through it because Riker and Worf aren't back from the Yamato, and they can't get them back because there's some sort of interference.
While Riker and Worf are on the Yamato, they keep traveling from room to room, encountering a layout that doesn't make sense, where there seem to be multiple bridges, and they even have kind of portal-type situations where they're looking out of one door and seeing the same character in the next room. And Worf, he seems to be overreacting to the situation.
A little bit, but I did like the one part where he got distressed and started yelling in Klingon, his native tongue, without even realizing it. It made it seem more natural. The interference eventually clears, and they're able to beam Riker and Worf back. They have to go all the way back to the bridge and walk onto the bridge before Picard realizes that they're back. It would be of the utmost importance to let Picard know that they're back.
Well, they do whatever they can in this episode to drag things out.
The opening keeps jumping around, and they realize they're being played with. And Troy, who has been totally ineffective at this point, tries to backpedal a little bit, because before they asked her, do you sense any intelligence? And she goes, absolutely not. No way, there's nothing out there. But now she's going, maybe it was an intelligence so vast that it eluded me before. Nice try, Troy. All right, you can talk about the face. I have face in quotes.
So the being behind this whole situation finally reveals himself to be this big dumb CGI face. It calls itself Nagilum. That looks like it was made out of silly putty that somebody made a face out of and then dropped on the ground and stepped on.
He's voiced by Earl Bowen, which is cool. I know him the most as the doctor from all the Terminator movies, the psychologist. Nagilum is addressing them by name, and he says them one at a time.
Picard. Riker. Geordi. Haskell.
It is becoming so clear that that guy is in so much trouble because they gave him a name, they gave him a spot that's usually filled by a main character. He's done. I also like how when he says Riker's name, Riker isn't initially looking at him and he acts surprised. He does it to look dramatic, but it makes him look stupid.
Riker.
Nagilum demonstrates his power by affecting Haskell.
He says he wants to explore what death is. Haskell's death is fairly entertaining.
I'd say more than fairly.
He probably figured, I'm so bored being on this show, I'm gonna go out with the bang.
My theory is that his entire audition was just that one scene. And they said, yes, we gotta have you on here, but then it turned out he couldn't act.
I bet the script said, Haskell falls over dead. And he was like, get out of the way. Then Nagilum says, I want to explore death further. It'll cost maybe around half of your crew. And obviously they don't want him to do that. But then Nagilum just lets them have a staff meeting.
Which again, they go to this room off on the side to have their meeting. It's all the same people that were on the bridge. It's not like Nagilum can't hear them while they're in there.
Picard opts, instead of letting Nagilum perform his experiments, to destroy the Enterprise instead, because it's his only course of action that would not give Nagilum what he wants. Picard chooses to spend his last 20 minutes of life sitting in his room, listening to some Eric Satie, ruminating on how this script got through. And Troy and Data show up. They both ask Picard, what is death?
Picard's explanation, probably the worst possible way that you could explain death to somebody who doesn't already know what it is. He explains it based on his own context, which is the way Starfleet seems to handle every situation. They base things off of their own starting point instead of thinking about others. He does not do a good job.
Picard's philosophy of death matches that Starfleet egocentrism of we're way too important to just not matter. The universe wouldn't let us just go into nothingness, and we are so important.
What we are goes beyond Euclidean or other practical measuring systems, and that our existence is part of a reality beyond what we understand now as reality.
They appear to be clear of the void all of a sudden, but the autodestruct is still going. This played out a lot like a 90s Outer Limits episode, where right up to the end you're not quite sure what's really real and what could happen, and there's going to be that twist at the end, but because it's Star Trek, it's the most obvious explanation, and just fizzles out into being exactly what it appears to be.
Which pretty much describes the entire episode.
Then Wesley's back in his chair, and Riker goes over and starts talking to him, and I wanted him to say, "You know, Wes, the last guy to sit in that chair died a horrible and painful death about 10 minutes ago." And Picard doesn't even make any sort of announcement. You know, Haskell was one of the most bored crewmen I ever knew. Hopefully we'll never see his like again. And at the end, Nagilum shows up to Picard alone, and Picard almost makes a threat, saying, "Next time we meet, it'll be on our terms." But the entire time, he had absolutely no control over the situation.
It's just another example of characters doing and saying things that are not the right things for the situation, which happens in every single scene in this episode.
Where silence has Lease. Give me an overall.
The entire situation of a godlike being manipulating reality and not seeming to understand things on a basic human level is not new. I would say it's been overused already at this point. We don't need it again. It's completely pointless to do another episode like that. The episode doesn't really come to a conclusion. Nagilum just kind of leaves them alone and decides to go away. And the entire episode feels so drawn out. I would have given it a C- if Nagilum didn't look so stupid, but I'm going to lower it down to a D+.
I'm also going to give this one a D+. I can completely relate to Haskell because the way he looked is the way I looked the whole time I was watching this one, and I wished that I could do a Macaulay Culkin and fall over dead in my chair. Pointless is a great word. It wasn't fresh, it wasn't original, it wasn't interesting. When they have a weak A plot, sometimes they'll try and share the burden with a B plot, but they didn't even try and do that in this one, which made it even less interesting to not even have that secondary thing to kind of go back to once in a while. And from what I thought was a pretty good season opener, to follow it with this is kind of a letdown. But I decided I'm going as Nagilum for Halloween this year.